Good morning on this Tuesday, the 10th of January. This is your 28storms.com update regarding the severe weather potential across the southeast over the next 24 hours. Beginning with the latest official update from the Storm Prediction Center, they have outlined much of the lower Mississippi Valley as having a slight risk of severe weather. The main probability of hail will exist over far northwest Mississippi, and the threat of damaging winds will exist across much of the warm sector, along with the 5% risk of tornadoes. As you can see, this approaching weather system has already triggered some severe weather across southeast Texas. Most notably, there was some significant flooding around the Houston metro, but not to mention there was a report of a tornado, along with some damaging wind and hail. Now it should be noted that the system is forecast to strengthen, therefore there is the concern of severe weather over much of Dixie. At this time, there are no ongoing severe thunderstorms, but a flood watch is in effect for portions of northwest Louisiana. The threat of heavy rainfall will begin to push eastward over the next 24 hours. As you can see from the latest quantitative precipitation forecast from the Hydrometeorological Prediction Center, several areas across the southeast are forecast to receive in excess of 1 to 3 inches. A look at the latest radar as of 4 a.m. local time reveals that much of the lower Mississippi Valley is already witnessing some rather wet conditions, and although severe weather is not ongoing, the threat will begin to ramp up as we get later on into the daytime hours. The latest water vapor animation shows us that we have a mid to upper level disturbance pushing across much of central Texas. Out ahead of that upper level low is where the greatest instability is located, therefore that is the reason why we are dealing with thunderstorms. And over the next 24 hours, a surface low will begin to form out ahead of this upper level feature, and that will really begin to set the stage for severe weather. As we can see on the latest HPC surface analysis, we already have a 1012 millibar surface low developing near Houston, Texas, and a stalled out frontal boundary extends northeastward from central Louisiana into central Mississippi and northern Alabama, and the northward extent of the frontal boundary will determine which areas are more likely to receive severe weather. Obviously, if this front does not continue to advance toward the north, then northern Alabama and northwest Mississippi will not have so much of a risk of severe storms. The latest surface observations confirms the presence of the surface low and stalled out frontal boundary. As we can see, the lowest surface pressure reading is near Lake Charles, Louisiana, where the pressure is now down to 1011.2 millibars, and toward the south over southeast Louisiana, we have temperatures in the mid to upper 60s along with our dew points. So this is a rather warm and muggy environment, but as we go toward the north of the front, temperatures quickly dip into the upper 40s and even the 30s out over northeast Texas. The latest output from the NAM model shows that the mid to upper level disturbance is correctly initialized over central Texas, and over the next 12 hours this mid to upper level feature will continue advancing more toward the east, so therefore the best divergence for our developing surface low is also going to shift more so into the lower Mississippi Valley. And as we head later into Tuesday evening and overnight Wednesday morning, the surface low is going to begin moving over northern Alabama. And here is a look at the surface forecast as of right now. Again, we have our developing but very weak surface low currently over Houston, Galveston, but the model is slowly developing this low a little bit further. And as we go into the evening hours, we're seeing the low deepen down to 1008 millibars over northern Mississippi before this low begins to spread on into Alabama. And also notice out in the warm sector, the surface winds are out of the southeast, and that is in stark contrast. If we go back to the 500 millibar level really quickly, this is showing the winds in the middle half of the atmosphere, and again those winds are out of the southwest, so we are seeing that directional wind shear with height. Therefore, the wind shear profiles definitely support the risk of severe weather, and this is also confirmed by another wind shear parameter. This is called the 0 to 1 kilometer helicity. And generally any values exceeding 200 are very extreme, and this is a current look at what the wind shear profiles are looking like as of this time this morning. And as you can see, they are very high across much of western Louisiana, but of course this is only one part of the puzzle. As of right now, we are somewhat lacking in the instability department, and that is the reason why we are not seeing any active severe thunderstorm or tornado warnings. Now the forecast as we go into the latter half of the morning hours, we see that the shear axis is continuing to extend a little bit more toward the northeast. As we go into noontime, it looks as though the greatest shear is going to be located over much of Mississippi. And as we go into the 6 p.m. time frame, the best shear is beginning to spread into western Alabama, including Tuscaloosa and Birmingham. And as we go into the midnight time frame, the threat is beginning to shift into east central Alabama, and as we head deeper into the morning, it looks as though the threat will shift eastward. As we turn to some of the other necessary ingredients for severe weather, the next up on the list is the lifted index, and as long as that surface low remains weak, we're not going to really see much in the way of any vertical lift required for sustained updrafts. And as of right now, the lifted index values are not very extreme, and some of the greater values are just limited near the coast, near southwest Louisiana, very close to that surface low. But as that surface low begins to strengthen and advance more toward the northeast, so will the lifted index values. We are now looking at noontime, and although these values aren't very high, we are seeing them beginning to approach -3 to -4 across far western Mississippi. So this is when the threat of severe weather may begin, although it's going to be relatively marginal in nature. And as we head into the afternoon hours, we see that the lifted index values are beginning to increase, especially as we go into the 6 p.m. time frame. And northwest Mississippi will be where the greatest threat of damaging hail may be present, and that is a result of the upper level low at 500 millibars continuing to move eastward, and there are very cold temperatures aloft associated with that upper level low, and that does support the added risk of hail. And then as we go into the overnight hours beyond 9 p.m. and into the midnight hour, notice that the values are still relatively high here across central Alabama and eastern Mississippi. So this is going to be a prolonged severe weather event that will not only last throughout the afternoon hours, but well on into the evening. So it is definitely suggested that you turn on your NOAA weather radio if you live in this area. Next up, we are going to evaluate the significant tornado parameter, which is derived from the short range ensemble forecast available at the Storm Prediction Center website. And before we review the latest forecast totals from this parameter, it should be noted that on April 27th, this significant tornado index maxed out at 10. And as you will soon see, we are not expecting anywhere close to that, so this is not going to be a significant tornado outbreak. In fact, the more likely threats will be damaging wind, and especially the risk of hail in northwest Mississippi. But the moral behind the story is that we cannot rule out a few isolated tornadoes, especially across central Mississippi, extending eastward through Alabama. And as we begin during the morning hours, the values are really not expected to be all that high. And the main reason of that is because the instability is still going to be rather lacking. But as we go into the late afternoon and early evening, notice that we are seeing a max of around 1 here across west central Alabama, and this threat is going to slowly shift a little bit more toward the east and then begin to diminish as we head into the morning hours on Wednesday before the system begins to clear the east coast. So just to recap, the vertical wind shear profiles do definitely support the risk of tornadoes, but luckily the threat will be limited due to the lack of available instability. Now, one thing that will have to be monitored as we go later on into the afternoon is the amount of daytime heating, and if we can get some of these clouds to move away from the region, that would allow for some more heating and therefore a greater increase in instability than what the models may have suggested. But as of right now, there are no indications of that happening. As always, just keep it tuned to the National Weather Service and your local news outlets for the most official and latest severe weather information. And also, please check out twisterdata.com if you are interested in taking a personal look at some of the other model guidance that was shown in this video. But that's all for now here at 28storms.com. We're going to try to keep the Facebook and Twitter feeds as up to date as possible during the duration of this event. But again, please follow the National Weather Service for the most up to date information. So thanks again, and we look forward to having you stop by again here soon.